After their drubbing the previous day, hopes began rising throughout the night aboard Kurita's warships. Leaving the strait at 4 a.m., he was plowing south as fast as the damaged Yamata could steam. The sighting of an American patrol plane at 7 a.m. on October 25th, followed by reports that lookouts had sighted masts 16 miles over the horizon ahead, led Kurita to assume they must be one of the Third Fleet's carrier task groups. If 16 miles was all that stood between his battleships and the Leyte Gulf invasion transports, he saw the chance for his big guns to polish them off, while his anti-aircraft gunners held off the enemy planes. 7th Fleet contained a large task group of 18 escort carriers, divided into 3 task units of 6 carriers each. The main duties of these ships were to provide combat air patrols over the Leyte beachhead and the invasion shipping. The escort carriers, or jeep carriers, had a top speed of just 14 knots. They were far too slow to escape the oncoming Japanese ships. Their thin hulls would not give much protection to the explosive stores of gasoline, bombs, and torpedoes. The Navy classified them CVEs, and the joke about their being combustible, vulnerable, and expendable now seemed only too accurate. Their air groups were not trained or equipped to fight an enemy fleet. At dawn on October 25th, the 7th Fleet's 3 escort carrier units were operating off the east coast of Samar. These units were identified by their radio call signs, Taffy 1, Taffy 2, and Taffy 3. Taffy 3 was the northernmost of the 3. Shortly after 6 a.m., Taffy 3, under the command of Rear Admiral Clifton Ziggy Sprague, had launched 12 fighters. It had also launched an anti-submarine patrol of 6 aircraft to cover the ships in Leyte Gulf, as well as aircraft for Taffy 3's own protection. At 6:45 a.m., anti-aircraft fire was seen to the northwest. A minute later, the carrier Fanshawe Bay picked up a surface contact on radar. At 6:47 a.m., Ensign Hans Jensen, pilot of an Avenger from the carrier Kadashan Bay, sighted and then attacked Japanese ships. With remarkable accuracy, he identified these as 4 battleships and 8 cruisers, accompanied by destroyers. Then, just before 7 a.m., lookouts on the escort carriers saw the masts and fighting tops of Japanese battleships and cruisers appear above the northern horizon. A minute later, heavy shell fire began falling near Taffy 3. The surprise was complete. Taffy 3 was in a desperate situation, facing an exceptionally powerful force, which also had a great superiority in speed over the escort carriers. The only ships which Clifton Sprague had available to protect his flat tops were the 3 destroyers and 4 destroyer escorts of his screen. After radioing Kincaid of the danger threatening the beachhead, where the transports were still unloading, Sprague made the courageous decision to hurl his puny force against the Japanese. He knew that there was little chance of surviving more than a quarter of an hour against such odds. At 6:57 a.m., Sprague turned his carriers due east and began working them up to their maximum speed. He ordered all his ships to lay smoke and started to launch every available aircraft. He committed his entire force to the attack. Japanese lookouts had sighted the escort carriers at 6:44 a.m. when Kurita's ships were deploying from column into a circular anti-aircraft disposition. Admiral Kurita then ordered general attack, permitting his ship's commanding officers to deploy against the U.S. ships on their own initiative and without referring to the flagship. At 7:16 a.m., Sprague ordered his 3 Fletcher-class destroyers, the Hull, Heermann, and Johnston, to counterattack the Japanese formation. They did this with remarkable heroism and tenacity. Led by the Johnston, the 3 destroyers charged to within 10,000 yards of the line of 4 Japanese heavy cruisers. Their 5-inch guns were no match for the storm of heavy-caliber shells, which threw up mountainous walls of water on either quarter. One of their torpedoes blew the bows off the Kumano, forcing the heavy cruiser to drop out of the battle along with the Suzuya, which had been hit by bombs. Then, a salvo of 14-inch shells hit the Johnston. It was like a puppy being hit by a fire truck. A handy rain squall sheltered the stricken tin can long enough for the crew to make repairs and get her underway again. She rejoined the action with her 5-inch guns under manual operation. The whole, with all but her forward turret wrecked, came dashing with the Hermann to take on the Japanese battleships. Their torpedoes failed to connect, but turning to avoid them, the heavy cruiser Haguro caught a shell in her rudder, which took her out of action. At the same time, Yamato broke off firing to outrun the streaking tracks of a torpedo spread. This maneuver took the flagship so far astern of the engagement that Kurita was never able to regain tactical control of his force as the confusion and smoke disrupted his battle line. During the hour when the Japanese admiral believed his battleships were locked with the 3rd Fleet carriers, Task Force 38 was actually some 100 miles due north. Halsey sent off airstrikes against Admiral Ozawa's decoy force, looking forward by noon to the prospect of blasting the cripples that our planes were setting up for us. At 8:30 a.m., half an hour before the first wave of aircraft made contact with the mobile fleet, he was handed a priority signal from Kincaid. Urgently need 6 battleships, Leyte Gulf, at once. Oldendorf had reported that his 6 battleships were running low on ammunition after their night engagement. The 7th Fleet commander knew he needed more firepower to defend the beachhead. While the small ships of Clifton Sprague's screen were conducting their desperate counterattacks, the Japanese ships were also subjected to incessant assaults by aircraft from the 3 Taffies. Many of these attacks were carried out by aircraft armed with weapons intended for ground support and quite unsuited for attack on large warships. Many others were dummy attacks by unarmed aircraft. Nonetheless, with the weapons available to them, the aircraft succeeded in sinking 3 heavy cruisers and damaging several other ships. Despite all these heroic efforts, the escort carrier, Gambier Bay, was eventually hit repeatedly by 8-inch gunfire, crippled, and sank at 9:07 a.m. But then, although his cruisers and destroyers were now on the verge of annihilating Taffy 3, Kurita ordered his ships to break off action at 9:11 a.m. With his force running low on fuel, a weary and dispirited Kurita abandoned his mission and returned to the San Bernardino Strait. I did not know, he would later confess, that Admiral Halsey had taken the fleet north. I did not realize how close I was to victory.